Elon Musk stepped out of the sleek black Tesla that had just rolled up to the factory gates. The air smelled of metal and oil, the rhythmic sounds of machinery humming through the massive industrial complex. He adjusted his jacket, scanning the factory floor through the glass-paneled walls before stepping inside. The moment he entered, a few workers straightened up, some nudging each other, whispering. Others remained slouched on benches, eyes glued to their phones, sipping coffee. The room was dimly lit by overhead lights, the occasional spark flying from welding stations in the distance. He walked further in, his footsteps muffled by the hum of conveyor belts. Engineers and assembly line workers were scattered around, some genuinely busy, others looking like they were simply killing time. It was a normal day at the Tesla factory, yet something caught his eye. Amidst the groups chatting, laughing, leaning against machinery, one man stood out. Near the end of the assembly line, where freshly built Tesla frames moved along the tracks, a single worker was hunched over, tightening bolts with a focused intensity. His uniform was stained with grease, his brow slick with sweat, but his hands never stopped. While others took their breaks, he continued, methodically checking every part, his movements precise and practiced. Elon paused, watching him. There was something almost hypnotic about the man's dedication. He wasn't glancing at the clock, wasn't half-heartedly going through the motions. He worked as if the car in front of him was his own, as if each bolt and wire were a personal responsibility. A few workers nearby noticed where Elon's gaze had landed and shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged knowing looks, others smirked, as if the man's diligence was amusing to them. But Elon wasn't laughing. He took a step closer, observing the way the workers' fingers moved, adjusting, securing, double-checking. The factory noise faded into the background as Elon's mind turned, processing, evaluating. This wasn't just another employee. This was someone who cared. Someone who took pride in what they did, even when no one was watching. Elon folded his arms, tilting his head slightly. Then, with a decisive nod, he made up his mind. He was going to talk to him. Elon took a step forward, his gaze fixed on the worker who remained completely immersed in his task, unaware of the presence now standing behind him. The rest of the factory seemed frozen for a moment as a quiet ripple of murmurs spread through the floor, eyes darting toward them, whispers exchanged. But Elon ignored all of it. He was focused solely on the man in front of him. With a slight tilt of his head, he finally spoke, his voice cutting through the industrial hum around them. "Hey, can I borrow you for a minute?" The worker stiffened slightly at the unexpected voice, then turned, eyes widening as he recognized who was addressing him. His face, streaked with faint smudges of oil, registered a brief flicker of shock before he quickly composed himself, straightening up. Sure. Of course." His voice was steady but held a hint of uncertainty. Elon nodded toward the far end of the factory, away from the buzzing conveyor belts and curious stares. "Let's step outside for a moment." The worker hesitated only a fraction of a second before setting down his tools and following. As they walked, Elon could feel the weight of the worker's stares pressing against his back, but he ignored them. Once outside, the air was cooler, fresher, carrying the faint scent of rubber and electricity. The worker rubbed his hands against his uniform absent-mindedly before glancing at Elon, waiting. "What's your name?" Elon asked, his tone casual but carrying the weight of genuine curiosity. "Daniel," the man responded. "Daniel Carter." Elon nodded. "How long have you been working here, Daniel?" "Almost 5 years," Daniel answered, shifting slightly, still unsure where this was going. "I started as an apprentice, worked my way up. I like being hands-on. I like making sure things are done right." There was no arrogance in his voice, just quiet certainty. Elon studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I noticed something back there. Everyone else was taking a break, but you weren't. Why?" Daniel blinked at the question, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because the car wasn't finished yet," he said simply. "It's my job." Elon let a small smile play on his lips. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most would wait for someone else to pick up where they left off. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. That's the problem, isn't it? If everyone thinks like that, nothing gets done properly. There was no bitterness in his voice, just a quiet conviction. I take pride in my work. I believe in what we're doing here. Elon leaned against the railing, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in Daniel's words. This wasn't just some rehearsed line, some attempt to impress. This was real. This was rare. You know, Tesla isn't just about making cars, Elon said finally. It's about pushing boundaries, changing the way people think about transportation, about energy, about the future. Daniel nodded, his expression unreadable. I know. Elon's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he straightened, slipping his hands into his pockets. You ever drive one? Daniel let out a breath of amusement. A Tesla? No. Just work on them. Elon smirked slightly. That's a shame. Daniel shrugged. Doesn't really matter. What matters is building them right. Making sure they're the best they can be. Elon's expression shifted, something sparking behind his eyes, an idea forming. But he didn't say anything yet. Instead, he glanced back toward the factory doors. Come on, he said, already turning. I want to show you something. Daniel hesitated briefly before following. As they stepped back inside, the factory seemed a little quieter, as if everyone was pretending not to watch. Elon led Daniel toward one of the finished models parked near the testing area, a sleek, jet-black Model S. He gestured to it. What do you think? Daniel exhaled slowly, eyes trailing over the contours of the car, the perfection of its build. She's beautiful, he admitted. Elon grinned. Go ahead. Sit inside. Daniel hesitated again, then carefully opened the door, lowering himself into the driver's seat. His fingers grazed the steering wheel, the smooth leather beneath his touch. The interior smelled new, clean, a mix of luxury and precision engineering. For a brief moment, he imagined what it would be like, driving down an open road, the hum of the electric motor beneath him. But he pushed the thought away quickly. This wasn't his. It never would be. He glanced up at Elon, who was watching him closely. Feels good, doesn't it? Elon mused. Daniel nodded but didn't speak. There was something about this moment that felt heavier than just a simple test sit. Something unspoken. Finally, Elon exhaled, stepping back slightly. You know, Daniel, he said slowly, I don't think people like you get noticed enough. Daniel frowned slightly, unsure of what to say. It's not about that, he said after a moment. I just do my job. Yeah, Elon said, a small smile playing at the edge of his lips. That's exactly why you should be noticed. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something unreadable, something that made Daniel shift slightly. As if he wasn't sure what to make of this conversation anymore. But Elon didn't elaborate. Not yet. Instead, he clapped a hand on the roof of the car. All right, he said. Back to work. But, stick around. I've got a surprise for you later. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly. A surprise. Elon just smirked. You'll see. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel sitting in the driver's seat of the Tesla, heart pounding just a little harder than before. Elon Musk took a step closer, his sharp gaze fixed on the worker who remained absorbed in his task, unaware of the presence now standing behind him. The factory's hum surrounded them, the mechanical rhythm of production never ceasing, but for Elon, the noise faded into the background. He had seen hundreds, thousands of employees over the years, but something about this man's dedication struck him differently. Most workers glanced at the clock, took their scheduled breaks, and approached their shifts with a sense of routine. But not this one. This man was fully engaged, moving with efficiency and precision, tightening bolts and adjusting components with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Elon finally spoke, his voice cutting through the surrounding industrial sounds. Hey, can I borrow you for a minute? The worker stiffened slightly, then turned, his expression flashing from concentration to surprise as he recognized who had addressed him. His face was streaked with faint smudges of grease, his uniform worn from labor, but his posture remained steady. Sure, he said, the uncertainty in his tone quickly masked by professionalism. Elon gave a slight nod, then gestured toward the far side of the factory, away from the others. Let's step outside. The worker hesitated only a second before setting down his tools and following. The eyes of his co-workers followed them as they walked, whispers spreading through the floor like an undercurrent, but Elon paid them no mind. The two stepped into the cool air outside the factory, the scent of rubber and electricity still faintly present in the atmosphere. The worker rubbed his hands together briefly, his palms stained with the residue of his labor, before glancing at Elon, waiting for him to speak. "What's your name?" Elon asked, his tone casual but carrying a weight of genuine curiosity. "Daniel," the man responded. "Daniel Carter." Elon nodded slightly, storing the name in his mind. "How long have you been working here, Daniel?" "Almost 5 years," Daniel replied, shifting slightly but keeping his voice steady. "Started as an apprentice, worked my way up. I like the hands-on work. Like making sure everything is done right." His tone held no arrogance, just quiet certainty. Elon studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I noticed something back there. Everyone else was taking a break, but you weren't. Why?" Daniel blinked to the question, as if the answer should have been obvious. "Because the car wasn't finished," he said simply. "It's my job." Elon let a small smile form at the corner of his lips. "Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most would just wait for the next shift to take over." Daniel shook his head slightly. "That's the problem. If everyone thinks like that, things don't get done right." There was no bitterness in his voice, just quiet conviction. "I take pride in my work. I believe in what we're doing here." Elon leaned against the railing, narrowing his eyes slightly as he processed Daniel's words. This wasn't a rehearsed speech. This was real. Rare. "You ever drive one?" Elon asked after a moment of silence. Daniel exhaled in slight amusement. "A Tesla? No. Just work on them." Elon smirked slightly. "That's a shame." Daniel shrugged. "Doesn't really matter. What matters is building them right." Elon's expression shifted, something sparking behind his eyes, a thought forming. But he didn't say anything yet. Instead, he nodded toward the factory doors. "Come with me. I want to show you something." Daniel hesitated briefly before following. As they stepped back inside, the factory's usual rhythm continued, but the air felt different. As if something unspoken had shifted. Elon led Daniel toward a finished Tesla Model S parked near the testing area, its glossy surface reflecting the factory lights. "What do you think?" Elon asked, gesturing toward it. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze trailing over the car's sleek body, taking in every detail. "It's beautiful," he admitted. Elon smirked. "Go ahead. Sit inside." Daniel hesitated again but finally opened the door, settling into the driver's seat. The interior was pristine, the scent of new leather and cutting-edge engineering filling his senses. His hands instinctively gripped the wheel, fingers brushing over the smooth surfaces, the digital interface humming softly. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to imagine it, driving down an open road, feeling the effortless acceleration, the silent power beneath him. But he quickly pushed the thought away. This wasn't his. It never would be. He glanced up at Elon, who was watching him closely. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Elon mused. Daniel nodded but said nothing. There was something about this moment that felt heavier than just a simple conversation. Something he couldn't quite place. Finally, Elon exhaled, stepping back slightly. "You know, Daniel," he said slowly, "I don't think people like you get noticed enough." Daniel frowned slightly, unsure of what to say. "It's not about that," he said after a moment. I just do my job. Yeah, Elon said, a small smile playing at his lips. That's exactly why you should be noticed. Daniel shifted slightly, still unsure where this was going. But Elon didn't elaborate. Not yet. Instead, he clapped a hand on the roof of the car. All right, he said. Back to work. But stick around. I've got a surprise for you later. Daniel narrowed his eyes slightly. A surprise. Elon just smirked. You'll see. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Daniel sitting in the driver's seat of the Tesla, heart pounding just a little harder than before. Elon Musk had always been a man of action rather than words, and once he made up his mind, there was no turning back. As he walked away from Daniel, a plan was already forming in his head. He had met thousands of workers, seen countless people who simply did their jobs, but Daniel stood out. His dedication was rare, his mindset even rarer. People like him deserved recognition, not just for their effort, but for the attitude they brought to their work. It wasn't about impressing anyone, and that's exactly why it was impressive. Later that day, as the factory continued its routine, Elon found himself watching from a distance, observing how Daniel carried himself. Unlike many others, who worked just hard enough to not get noticed for slacking, Daniel moved with purpose, with a quiet sense of responsibility. He didn't just assemble cars, he ensured they were built to perfection. Elon didn't need to ask anyone about him. He already knew everything he needed to know. That's when he decided. It had to be something big, something unforgettable. But most importantly, it had to be a surprise. As the shift neared its end, Elon approached Daniel once more, casually, as if nothing significant was about to happen. Hey, he said, drawing Daniel's attention. I've got something planned for you. Daniel blinked, momentarily thrown off. For me, he asked, clearly not used to being singled out. Elon simply smirked. Yeah, but you'll have to wait and see. The uncertainty in Daniel's face was evident, but so was the appreciation. He didn't push for details, didn't ask unnecessary questions. Instead, he just nodded. Whatever it is. Thank you. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something deeper beneath it, genuine gratitude, mixed with quiet curiosity. Elon patted him on the shoulder before walking off, leaving Daniel to wonder what exactly was coming. The next day, the factory operated as usual. Workers clocked in, some eager, others sluggish. Conversations buzzed through the facility, people chatting idly between tasks. But Daniel was as focused as ever. Even after Elon's cryptic words, he hadn't changed his approach. While others took their breaks, he worked. While some cut corners, he double-checked his work. And while the rest of the team operated with the usual blend of effort and indifference, he continued to stand out, not by intention, but by nature. Then it happened. The sound of an approaching vehicle turned heads across the factory floor. Not just any vehicle, but a brand new Tesla, its paint gleaming under the bright industrial lights. More than that, it wasn't just another delivery or test drive, because wrapped around its front was a massive red bow, the kind you only saw in car commercials or extravagant gift presentations. Whispers spread like wildfire. Workers nudged each other, eyes wide with curiosity. Some exchanged glances, already suspecting that something unusual was unfolding. Then the driver's door opened, and Elon Musk himself stepped out. If the factory wasn't paying attention before, they certainly were now. Conversations halted. Movements slowed. A few workers straightened up, as if suddenly realizing they might be witnessing something important. But Daniel, standing at his usual station, remained unaware, fully absorbed in his work. It wasn't until Elon spoke that he finally looked up. Daniel, Elon called, his voice cutting through the murmurs and background noise. Daniel turned, his expression shifting from focus to confusion as he saw the car, the bow, the crowd of curious onlookers. Slowly, he put down his tools and wiped his hands on his uniform. Yeah. Elon gestured toward the Tesla with a slight grin. Come here. Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second before stepping forward, his brows furrowed, his expression caught somewhere between skepticism and curiosity. The other workers watched intently, some leaning in, others whispering amongst themselves. The anticipation was thick in the air. As Daniel reached Elon, the CEO clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You've been working here for 5 years," Elon began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had made a decision and wasn't about to change it. "You show up every day, you do your job, and you don't just go through the motions. You care about what you do. And that's rare." Daniel swallowed, unsure where this was going, his hands instinctively gripping the sides of his uniform. I appreciate that," he said carefully. Elon nodded, then turned slightly, gesturing to the Tesla behind him. "So, I figured it's only right that you get to own one." Silence. Absolute silence. For a full second, the words didn't seem to register. Daniel stood motionless, blinking as if trying to process what he had just heard. Then, a slow shift in his expression, confusion melting into disbelief into something dangerously close to shock. "Wait," he breathed out, barely above a whisper. "Are you serious?" Elon smirked. "Dead serious. It's yours." The factory floor erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even scattered applause filled the space. Some workers exchanged stunned glances, others just stared, unable to comprehend what had just happened. But Daniel remained frozen in place, his breath shallow, his mind struggling to catch up. I don't know what to say," he admitted, shaking his head slightly as if trying to ground himself. This is crazy." "It's not crazy," Elon countered. "You earned it." Daniel's gaze flickered to the car again, his reflection staring back at him from its flawless surface. 4 years, he had built these machines, ensuring their perfection, but never in his wildest dreams had he thought he'd own one. He reached out hesitantly, fingers brushing against the cool metal, almost expecting it to disappear like some surreal illusion. But it was real. It was real, and it was his. A wave of emotions crashed over him all at once, gratitude, disbelief, even a flicker of overwhelming joy that he struggled to contain. Thank you," he finally managed, his voice raw, his throat tight. I don't know how to, no need for speeches," Elon cut in, grinning. "Just enjoy the damn car." Daniel let out something between a laugh and a disbelieving exhale, shaking his head again as if still trying to convince himself this was real. Around them, the other workers were watching with a mixture of emotions, amazement, admiration, and, for some, perhaps even regret. Because they all knew the truth. They had been the ones taking breaks, the ones cutting corners, the ones assuming no one noticed. And now, standing before them, was proof that effort did get recognized. That dedication did matter. And that sometimes, when you put in the work, the universe, or in this case, Elon Musk, had a way of paying it back. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaling one last time before turning back to Elon. "You're serious," he said again, as if needing the confirmation one more time. Elon laughed. "Drive it home before I change my mind." That was all the permission Daniel needed. With a final nod of appreciation, he stepped toward the driver's side, opened the door, and slid into the seat. This time, he wasn't just imagining it. This time, it was real. The factory watched as he started the car, the quiet hum of the electric motor filling the air. As he pulled away, the realization finally settled in, not just for him, but for everyone present. Hard work wasn't always noticed. But when it was, it could change everything. Daniel gripped the wheel, his hands slightly trembling, his mind still struggling to process what had just happened. The hum of the electric motor beneath him felt surreal, the smooth leather seat pressing against his back as if reminding him that this was real. He swallowed hard, exhaling slowly, his pulse still racing. He had spent years assembling these cars, but he had never truly imagined sitting in one that belonged to him. And now, here he was, behind the wheel of a brand new Tesla, gifted to him by none other than Elon Musk himself. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide eyes, disbelief still etched into his features. Around him, the factory had erupted into a chaotic mix of murmurs and movement. Some workers had abandoned their break, suddenly standing straighter, tools in hand, as if trying to prove something. Others exchanged stunned glances, their expressions shifting between admiration and envy. A few even started working with newfound enthusiasm, hoping, perhaps desperately, that their sudden dedication might be noticed as well. But it was too late. The moment had already passed. The reward had already been given. And deep down, they knew it. Daniel barely noticed the shifting atmosphere behind him. His mind was still caught between shock and overwhelming gratitude. He turned his head toward Elon, who stood with his arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face, watching everything unfold. Daniel swallowed again, struggling to find the right words, but nothing seemed enough. "I don't know how to thank you," he finally managed, his voice unsteady. "I mean, this is beyond anything I ever expected." Elon shrugged slightly, his smirk turning into something softer. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You earned it." Daniel exhaled sharply, shaking his head as if trying to clear the fog of disbelief. I was just doing my job." "And that's exactly why you deserve it," Elon replied, his gaze unwavering. "You didn't do it for attention. You didn't do it to impress anyone. You did it because you care about what you do. That's rare." Daniel blinked, his throat tightening. He had never considered himself special. He had simply done what he believed was right. But now, standing here, feeling the weight of this moment, he realized just how much it meant, not just to him, but to everyone around him. He glanced over at the other workers, some of whom had already returned to their stations, moving faster than before, their faces tense with the realization that they had missed their chance. Others still stood frozen, watching him, their expressions unreadable. He could feel their eyes on him, could sense the unspoken thoughts running through their heads. Some were probably happy for him. Others, maybe not so much. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that, for once, someone who truly worked hard had been recognized. And that alone was enough. He turned back to Elon, nodding slowly, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I won't forget this," he said, his voice steadier now. "Ever." Elon gave a small nod of approval. "Good. Now get out of here before I change my mind." A laugh escaped Daniel, shaky but real, and with one final look around, he pressed his foot to the pedal. The Tesla glided forward, smooth and silent, cutting through the factory floor like a ghost. The feeling of acceleration sent a shiver down his spine, but this time, it wasn't from disbelief. It was from something else entirely. Pride. As he exited the factory, leaving behind the murmurs, the stares, the quiet resentment, and the stunned admiration, he realized something. He hadn't just won a car today. He had proven something, to himself, to his co-workers, to everyone who had ever doubted whether hard work truly paid off. And as the factory gates disappeared in his rearview mirror, he knew that, from this moment on, everything had changed.